Yes, yes, yes. Take a seat because we gotta speak. Now, welcome back to the next episode of RCC, which is otherwise known as Retro Cartoon Convo. Now, in today's episode, we will be talking about the epic odyssey of the Ronin Warriors, or otherwise known as the Samurai Troopers. Now, this anime had originally dropped in 1989 and 88, or back forth, whichever one you prefer, which was known as the Samurai Warriors. Now, after it gained its popularity over in Japan, it ended up coming over here in, I want to say around 96 and 98 on like the USA Network and like the Sci-Fi Network. And then it finally, from what most people around here known it as at that time in 1999 on Cartoon Network. Now, the story was about these 5 warriors who ended up going up against this evil villain. I mean, this dude was menacing, called Talpa, who ruled over the dynasty alongside his 4 dark warriors. Now, these 5 warriors, known as the Ronin Warriors, donned these mystical armor that gave them enough power to be able to go up against this whole entire dynasty of mythical armored troopers. Now, the first of our Ronin Warriors was their unofficial leader called Ryo Sendo. This man was courageous, honorable, all the above to make a great leader. Almost on some Leonardo complex, you know what I mean? His armor that he donned was the armor of wildfire. Now, the armor of wildfire was a red armor, and his weapons of choice was 2 katanas. His main attack was called when he ended up putting the 2 handles of his sword together to make a white column of fire. Ryo was also accompanied by one of his most entrusted friends and pet called White Blaze, which was a white tiger. Our next Ronin warrior will be known as Kenta Rei Fon, who also donned one of the strongest armors amongst all 5 of the Ronin warriors, known as the most violent one, which was the orange and brown armor of Argra. His weapon of choice was 2 folds. He had a 3-section staff that also converted into a naginata. Now, the 3-section staff is basically like a nunchuck staff that has 3 different sections. And then when he put them all together, he made the naginata. His special technique was called Iron Rock Crusher, is where he would take his 3-section staff, put it together into his naginata, spin around his head, and stamp his staff / naginata onto the ground, which created a hellish earthquake that would end up destroying everything in his path, which is why he was known as one of the strongest and most destructive Ronin warriors. Our third Ronin warrior is by far my most favorite Ronin warrior out of all of them, hence I'm wearing his colors, which will be Sage Deity, who wielded the green armor of Halo. Ooh, baby, let me tell you. The weapon that Sage wielded was a Nodachi, also known as a Japanese broadsword. Man, when I tell you that this dude's power was amazing to me when I was watching when I was growing up, because I always had a fascination with swords. And with his sword technique, he had one of the quickest sword techniques and attacks out of the whole crew. It was called his Thunderbolt Cut. He would use to cut through his enemies in a wide range downward slash, and sometimes it came out as a charged particle beam. You never knew when it came to Sage. He, to me, had the most versatile move out of the whole crew. Fun fact, Sage Deity, last name Deity, came from an actual samurai called Deity Musashi, who was known to be one of the most famous samurais back in, the Japanese era, like samurai era. He was known to be the one-eyed dragon because he was blind in one eye. Hence, Sage, his art style was where he ended up having half of his eye covered. It was to basically give a head nod to Musashi and the Deity family. Our 4th member is Sai Mori of the Samurais. Now, he is the oldest and most commonest out of all of them, and he donned the blue armor of Torrent, which represents the water. Now, with him being the oldest and the most calmest, he was always even keeled and cool, even though he had the power of a raging wave or tsunami. Sai's weapon of choice was a Jumonji Yuri, or Jumonji Yuri, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Basically a 3-pronged staff that can capture enemies' weapons, break them, and also is very good at piercing. He also had a Tanto dagger and claws that were connected to his gauntlets. Now, his finishing move or sure kill move was the Super Wave Crusher, where he ended up shooting basically like these torrent of bubbles and water, almost like a hydro cannon, if you wanted to take it to Pokemon terms for those who are more familiar with that series. And it would pierce and break through literally mountains. This man was powerful. Just think about having a water gun that had the pressure of a cannon. Now, our fifth and last, but certainly not least from his credentials, is Ryo Hashiba. Now, Ryo, man, he is basically the most intelligent and most level-headed Ronin warrior. He's the one who keeps the hot-headed ones in check. He donned the indigo armor of Stratus, which by all other standards, everyone else was found on Earth or had powers of the Earth. He has the powers of the stars, man. I'm telling you, this dude was one of these stronger versions outside from Kento, who is his best friend. He was the, I want to say, third strongest member of the whole team. Moen's armor of choice was a collapsible golden bow alongside his quiver, which gave him unlimited ammo. And he was very proficient with this. He was one of the best marksmen of the shows, and he could hit anything from anywhere, man. He could hit a satellite from the ground to space. Man was amazing. And his finishing move was known as Aero Shock Wave, which this man was able to obliterate part of a mountain with this thing. It's basically a beam of light that he shoots. I mean, as you can tell, everybody is basically of this show can destroy literally anything with their final moves. Hence, they're called sure kill moves. Insane, amazing. Oh, and he had the ability to put like a light barrier around himself, because that's how he's able to descend from the stars, from space down. And he could also protect himself from minor attacks. Each Ronin warrior had their personality traits guided by their virtues, which is known as their Daos. Now, the first one, which is Ryo, the leader, his was of Jin, which is also known as benevolence and righteousness. Kenta's virtue was Gi, which is known as justice. Sage virtue was Ri, or Ray, whichever way you want to pronounce it, and his was grace. Sai's virtue was Shin, also known as trust. And Rowan's virtue was Chi, which was very befitting for him because it means wisdom. Now, much later on in the series, because, I mean, the series was only really 39 episodes long. They had a whole bunch of overs. But later on in the series, when all 5 warriors end up becoming found and come together to battle the forces of evil, they end up getting, in a pinch like any other heroes, even though they have these amazing armors that have all these amazing abilities that are destructive. Now, when Ryo gets the armor of Inferno, which is the combination of all 5 armors put into one, having the armor of Wildfire as his base. Now, in the very beginning, when he first got this armor, he couldn't control it at all. It was way too powerful until he ended up getting the swords from the Netherworld. When he ended up getting those, it ended up allowing him to channel that power, which allowed him to basically destroy anything in his path. He was the secret weapon to actually defeat the main bad guy. Now, on to the bad guys of the show. Now, the main antagonist to the whole show, as I said in the very beginning, is Tulpa, who is the leader of the dynasty. Now, Tulpa was defeated by the Ancient One about 1,000 years ago, and then had his spirit sent to the Netherworld. They couldn't destroy his body, his armor, so his armor stayed here, and then the Ancient One ended up turning his armor into 9 different armors. So, secret spoiler of the show, the 5 armors that the Ronin Warriors have are actually the body parts of Talpa. So this power that they have gotten was from Talpa, who was the bad guy. But that was the only way that they'd be able to defeat him. It's the only way to defeat energy of that level is to have that same energy combat against it. But they gave it to the 5 Ronin Warriors with their virtue. Now the other 4 were taken back to Talpa. He basically stole them and made them into his 4 warlords. These 4 virtues were known as cruelty, corruption, illusion, and venom. Man, talk about a headache. The first warlord that made his appearance in the show is also the leader, known as Anubis, who is the dark warrior of cruelty. Toshitaba Koma was recruited by Talpa 400 years ago because of all the bloodshed and cruelty and ambition that he's shown way back when. So he was very easily influenced. Anubis wore the armor of cruelty, which is known as the armor of the orb. It was representing spring, and his guiding virtue was Chu, which is loyalty. Hence, that's why he was the most loyal out of all the masters or warlords. Anubis' weapon of choice was a Kusari Gama, and his finishing move was Quake with Fear, where he would take the chain of his weapon, slam it into the ground, and would make a multitude of chains that would pop up out the ground to either ensnare or puncture his enemy. Our next bad guy is Carl, the warlord of corruption. His main ability and power was the control over darkness. His rival that he always went up against was Sage, my guy, of Halo, because his element was light. Now, his armor is also known as the armor of winter. Carl's guiding virtue is obstinance. Otherwise, he's basically petty. Carl's weapon was a Nodachi and armored spikes. And his surefire kill was Black Lightning Slash. Yeah, man, this guy, he was intense. He was very intense and gave my man Sage a run for his money. Most of the time, but Sage always came out on top. Our third warlord is Deus, the warlord of illusions. Now, Deus is one of the more sneakier types, and he's also the oldest and one of the more cunning ones. Deus' armor is the armor of illusion, and he normally goes up against Kenta. He's like Kenta's main rival. Now, the armor of illusion is also known as a spider, which represents the summer, and his guiding virtue is to endure. But in the English dub, they turned it into serenity. Now, his weapon is 6 kanas that's attached to a small handle that he normally keeps on his back, and it's supposed to represent like spider legs. So, and these could reach as far as he wants them to. So he's very tricky, and it also is pretty hard to fight this man. But our fourth warlord is Sekhmet, the dark warlord of venom. Now, his main antagonist that he likes going up against is Saya, the Torrent. Sekhmet's weapon of choice is 6 katanas that have poison in them that are at the tip of them that are able to blind his opponents. The reason why he has these 6 weapons is because he can move his arms so fast it looks like he has 6 arms, hence he's able to hold all 6 weapons. His virtue is petty. Even though Talpa has his generals or his warlords and everything like that, he still was no match for the Ancient One. The Ancient One back in 1,000 years ago during the warring time was a mystic who was able to defeat Talpa and send his spirit to the nether realm. Now, he was gravely injured by Talpa, but he still was able to be a guide and spirit for the Ronin Warriors. So he act like the bridge to the netherworld to Talpa so that the warriors will be able to get to Talpa and defeat him. The Ancient One was no slouch. Even though he was injured by Talpa, and while he was helping, he has a staff with him that is basically known as a talisman with charms on top of it, these ring charms, and he used this staff to perform magic and feats that no other could. So with his help, he was able to the warriors were able to hold off a lot of these combat situations that normally no one can, and he was able to unlock their full potential because obviously he was the one who split up the armor. Now, there were a couple of other characters that had some important roles, so non-important roles. So I suggest that everyone goes ahead and check out the Ronin Warriors. It's a real great watch. It's only like 39 episodes. It had about 3 overs, but if you're really interested, go ahead and check it out. Come back to the comments and let me know what you guys think of it. But until the next time, peace.